The Kushites, they decided to go into Egypt and to take control of the situation, to sort things out, to restore traditions, to restore religion, to restore law and order, and to basically remind the people in Egypt who they really were.
They were trying to retake Kemet because Kemet was theirs. It was their bloodline. They were not foreign invaders. They were individuals who were part of the original bloodline, attempting to retake the bloodline and the land which was once their own. So that line of 7 or 8 Nubian kings was an attempt to give an African renaissance, to return Kemet back to African hands after the Assyrians were attempting to cut off Kemet from the Sudan or cut off Kemet from Nubia.
During the period of Kushite rule in Egypt, the way they administered that country was quite interesting. What would happen is the male pharaohs would then rule from the city of Napata. Female rulers would then rule from Waset, which is in Egypt.
In Africa, women didn't rule and men didn't rule. Men and women ruled equally with a co-rulership with different functions, where the woman was fully vested and the man was fully vested.
And what I find interesting and very attractive about this civilization is the fact that women could actually rule in their own right. So they didn't have to be, rulers because they were waiting for a boy king to grow up, or they weren't ruling behind the scenes while, the guy was the king and he was the official ruler. They actually ruled in and of themselves.
Now, who were these female rulers? Some people say that they were the wives of the Kushite pharaohs. Some people say that they were the sisters of the Kushite pharaohs. Whichever be the case, they formed a parallel dynasty. And that dynasty would be aunt being succeeded by her niece, and that kind of line. Iron, the center of that industry, was of course Meroe.
Meroe is already a city, a royal city, when the capital is further north at Napata.
The royal city of Meroe is very important to our understanding of the achievements of the Kushites because it was actually a planned city. It was planned, it had a water sanctuary, which are known as the baths, it had temples, and it also had spacious homes on the scale of aristocrats.
Today at this ancient site of Meroe, we can see the most amazing arrangement of pyramids. Here, like in other parts of the Nile Valley, it's still debated whether the pyramids were used just for burials or if they were astrological markers and places for holy rituals.
The city of Meroe dates back to about the 10th century BC, although this is controversial. If one looks at some of the older writers writing in the 19th century, they argue that Meroe is so old that it even predates ancient Egypt. But let's get with the conservative dates, 10th century BC. Scholars who have been to Meroe have all pointed out the same thing, the huge amounts of iron slag.
Meroe was a massive industrial center of antiquity and clearly a major center of iron production.
As a production center, it's long before the Industrial Revolution, but in a certain way it's an industrial city.
In fact, the early explorers call it Birmingham of Africa.
Now, why the Birmingham of Africa? Well, Birmingham, back in the day, was the center of England's iron working industry.
As an industrial centre, it was very, very important. The main thing that people think about when they talk about Meroe is iron. There was iron production there. Some people have even said they had steel production.
In this area, it was rich in iron ore, so it allowed Meroe to develop not just as a major political and, with Amun Temple, religious center, but also as a major industrial center, which perhaps traded with countries elsewhere.
There are reports that the King Kush had trade routes going as far as India, and that many Nubians settled there, creating an area called Indus Kush.
That makes you look at how people inside Meroe related to one another and to the outside world in a new way.
Meroe has a whole series of pyramids in a very good state of preservation. There are at least 84 pyramids, and it's quite possible that many more have since been found.
I'm standing here at the pyramid complex of Meroe. Here in Sudan, there are over 200 pyramids that have been found here to date. This is almost twice as many as its neighbor in Egypt. These pyramids were built by the Nubians. And this is just one of the complexes that can be seen here today.
Gold and iron were two most important trading products in Kush. Gold has a long history because the reason why Nubia got the name Nubia in the first place is derived from the ancient Egyptian word nub, which means gold.
And what the ancient Egyptians are saying is that this is the land of gold. This is where we get gold from.
There was a reputation that the Egyptians had that gold was as plentiful as dust. Wasn't true, but this was a reputation that it developed. But where did the Egyptians get their gold from in the first place? They got them from the Kushite gold mines.
They traded with each other.
Herodotus mentions that gold was used to enchain prisoners. Now, he may well be exaggerating, but since there are images of even mundane things like golden tweezers, the fact that gold would then be used to make tweezers, that shows that it's not a far stretch of the imagination for Herodotus to say that gold would then be used to enchain prisoners.
Many of the things that we think of as advanced culture or advanced technology has its root within Kemet.
We know that pottery was first used in Sudan rather than in Egypt.
The Kushites throughout their whole history were always very good at making pottery. They were very artistic, and their pottery is some of the best in the ancient world. That was also manufactured at Meroe.
This is the great glory of Meroe, the pottery. Much of this has been conserved and restored. What's extraordinary is how thin they're able to make this pottery and how they choose every tradition open to them.
What's amazing here is this pottery is over 2,500 years old, and much of it is still usable today.
This is much more an Egyptian form. That's a little baby feeding cup. That's just the mud of the Nile.
Now, the last ruler, Shepenupet II, was on the throne when the Assyrians conquered Egypt. They made their conquest in 663 BC.
When the last of the Nubian kings, Tawentameni, fought his last conflict with Ashurbanipal, who was the Assyrian king in 664 BCE, we see Kemet being split from the African world, or an attempt to split Kemet from the African world. As the subsequent more barbarous invaders took control of Egypt, the kings of Kush were afraid that their central kingdom would be attacked, would be destroyed. So they moved their capital from Napata to Meroe, which is why Meroe grows when Napata declines.
The kings moved their burial ground, their pyramids, to Meroe, and perhaps they moved the capital city even earlier, around 500–600 BC.
So this dividing line that was set up by the Kushite kings was a matter of defense, a matter of safety.
After this, there are no more black rulers of Egypt. The rulers are now Assyrians, or Assyrian puppets.
And essentially the northern part of Kemet became part of the culture and history and civilization of Assyria. Assyria became the focal point, the married line, the feminine line, the female line of Kemet was deliberately usurped by the Assyrian kings.
And therefore Shepenupet II was the last independent black ruler of Egypt
As the Assyrian kings took control of Kemet, then we have a resurgence in consciousness in Nubia. The Kushite people, the Nubian people in the south, resurged because after 664, perhaps by 590 BCE, there were no further attempts by the Nubians, by the Kushites, to retake Kemet. That's why Meroe had a second renaissance. It had a renaissance before, but that's why it had a second renaissance, because the Kushite kings, the Nubian kings, were no longer trying to take back Kemet. That's why the Meroitic script was resurged.
Now, during the time of Kushite pharaoh Natasen, the Kushites invent this script, which scholars call Meroitic.
And interestingly, they also borrowed from Egyptians the signs for writing their language.